What does the 2023-2024 season hold in store for Wild prospect Jack Peart? We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Nick Maxson joins us as we discuss Jack Peart, his 2022-2023 season, who he is in general, and we'll take a look at the outlook for this year for one of the Minnesota Wild's many prospects. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As mentioned, we're joined by Nick Maxson today. You can hear him as part of MNCAA on the Soda Pod and also the Huskies Warming House. Nick, it's been a little bit since we've had you on the show. How are things going?
It's been a little bit here, Seth. Yeah, happy to be with you guys. Obviously, running two podcasts and then doing some broadcasting here and there has kept me pretty busy, but never, ever busy enough to come on to Locked on Wild with you, Seth. So happy to be with you again, man.
Yeah, and I'm excited to dive in and talk a little bit about Jack Peart, somebody who you have had a chance to see very closely, and a perfect opportunity as we move through Locked on Wild boot camp to kind of step away from that a little bit, but look at the future. Look at a player who we hope to have a big role on this team when he is ready to make the NHL roster. And so let's just start for those who maybe aren't super familiar with Jack Peart. Just tell us a little bit about who he is and, more importantly, what sorts of things he brings to the ice.
So for those, and I wouldn't imagine there are a lot that are in this position here, Seth, those who don't follow, the youth hockey, junior hockey, and collegiate. Jack Peart is a two-way defenseman, got his kind of rise to fame with Grand Rapids and then also with the Fargo Force of the USHL. Spent time with Team USA on both World Junior teams, and now entering his junior year with the St. Cloud State Huskies. What he brings to the ice, he brings more than not a calming presence, a high hockey IQ, just a smart playmaker, efficient skater, and also one that has, I think, a higher ceiling and I think a lot of misconception around him. I think at times, especially in this first two seasons with St. Cloud, one thing that maybe stalled a little bit or maybe gave pause to some folks that maybe weren't familiar with his game was sometimes it appeared that he was a little bit too calm and maybe, was a little slow to make decisions, but made some big strides in that department his sophomore season. And I'll tell you what, if he repeats some of his performances against Minnesota State and the Gophers in this last year's NCAA tournament, he's looking to have a really big step here in his junior season with St. Cloud.
Well, and he's one of those players too that came in young and was able to still make an impact. And we often think too, in instances of players looking like they just are kind of playing in slow motion.
Yep.
It's a lot for anybody at that age to take in. And so for him to most often than not, you just have to kind of take it all in and be able to digest it and move on. And so for him to be able to do that and still be fairly productive is a huge step in his development.
It is, 17 points as a freshman, 2 goals, right? But more importantly, he learned the pace of the game. It took him about a half of a season, right? And that's the typical jumping stone for most collegiate athletes when you transition from whether it's juniors or high school. Mind you, like you mentioned, true freshman, again, 18 years of age, going into his first team with St. Cloud a couple of years back. But as the season went along, you start to saw the adjustment. You start to understand and witness that, okay, he was understanding the pace of the game, when to make certain plays, when it was okay to maybe, do the so-called puck off the glass and maybe fight another day type decisions, right? Um, you could see that progression, and we saw that continue again this past season. And the big thing that he did was he took more of the offensive part of his game, and he just said, we're just going to do it, right? So almost doubled his shot total. His point total didn't increase by a ton, only one more goal, 3 as opposed to 2, 24 points in the season. But this, again, he's a two-way defenseman, really defense first. He's kind of like, if you want to give a wild comparable, very similar to a Jonas Brodin in terms of his style of play. Certainly not nearly the caliber of skater that Brodin is, but the way that he approaches the position, the way that he executes that is very, very similar to number 25.
Wow. Well, and if you can get a player that has those good instincts, that's the big thing is those intangible things that you can't teach. You can coach up the offense in other areas in that regard. But if you have a player that just has a knack for knowing where to be and what needs to be done, especially on the defensive side of the puck, that's half the battle right there.
It really is. And, Seth, when you get to the higher levels, right, your mistakes, you often are paid back, right? You're going to be capitalized on when you do those. There's one thing about Jack's game is that his hockey IQ, his smarts, he rarely makes the big mistakes, right? His hockey IQ, as we mentioned before, is probably his strongest asset. The one thing that, for those who've watched him, and maybe those who don't, the one thing that was sort of the knock on him was oftentimes on breakouts, he would kind of sit behind the net maybe a little bit, would maybe wait for that long stretch pass, really wasn't using his feet. Last 5 games of last season, including the playoffs, we saw him when he was flushed out, feel comfortable skating with the puck off the ice. That was one of the big stepping stones for him. And then joining the rush. He was very effective against the Mavericks and the Gophers in the playoffs last year. That is a Nick Perbix, for those who don't know, former St. Cloud State defenseman, now Tampa Bay Lightning blue liner. That was sort of his big jump into his junior season. And that's sort of what's next for Jack. The one thing I said again is if he can combine that sort of just confidence to, it's okay to skate and then be the guy and join in the rush. If he can combine that, and then with his instincts to be defense first, he is going to be a special player. Now, is it going to be, maybe top pairing defenseman? No, he's probably going to be more middle pairing, maybe bottom 3 defensive guy. But again, he's not going to lose you any games, but he's also maybe not necessarily going to win one with his offense.
Sure. Let's flip. Let's look at some of the things for this year, expectations for Peart, some of the things that he's working on and gearing up, and a little bit of a timetable kind of as what to expect from him beyond this season. We'll talk about all that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Our next partner has a product I use on an everyday basis. And honestly, it comes down to this for me. It was too much to have multiple bottles of vitamins and supplements that you had to try to figure out, okay, I need 2 out of this bottle. I need 1 out of this bottle. You're trying to get it all organized. It's a mess, right? When you're trying to leave for work, AG1 takes all of that hassle and simplifies it into one delicious scoop in a glass of water. That's all you need. And you are setting yourself up for a day full of optimism and energy. AG1 is full of 75 high-quality ingredients that give you help in terms of everything from energy to your gut health, to focus, strength, and clarity. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Again, that's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out and start feeling way better today. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers who tune in throughout the week, tomorrow we will go into season expectations for Brandon Duhaime. That's where I get my chance to shine, being the president of the fan club. So you'll get a chance to hear that on tomorrow's show. Over-unders, season assignments, all that coming up on tomorrow's show. We continue to talk Jack Peart today with Nick Maxson. Nick, let's look at what's coming up for Peart in his junior season this year. What are some of the expectations for him that we can hope to see throughout the year?
I think the big thing is, can he increase a little bit of that offense while also maintaining that defensive prowess, right? Now, it's going to be a little, I want to say tough, not in the sense that I don't think he can do it, right? But you got to remember too, St. Cloud is bringing back Dylan Anhorn too, who was an offensive defenseman himself, right? Ended his season early in January with essentially a non-contact injury. He is expected to be ready for the start of the season, so he kind of bit overshadowed. But for St. Cloud, they've always had, at least the past couple of seasons, that one offensive defenseman. We're talking guys like Jack Peart with Boston. We've already mentioned Nick Perbix, Jimmy Schultz, the former Minnetonka skipper. But for him, if he's going to round out his game, I know we talked about shots on net, but how about getting them through, right? Maybe some time on the power play. And again, continuing to join the rush and not be afraid to sometimes drive possession in the offensive zone. It's okay to be that first guy in, maybe make a pass and then, kind of fade back towards the blue line. I think he's got to be more comfortable in that realm. When Nick Perbix was doing this is what really drew the ires of Tampa Bay when he got his call up last season and essentially never left the NHL. So to me, that's his biggest step, is how do you balance being an offensive threat on the rush as well as in the zone, whilst also making sure that you're taking care of your own end as well.
Now, the interesting thing here, because the Wild have some defensive prospects, Brock Faber most notably, who's going to be on the team this year. You got guys like Carson Lambos who are kind of that next wave. Mm-hmm. So the big question here becomes, do we see Peart's return for his senior season, or is there more of a push that he may sign in ELC at that point, or do you think he'll go the full 4?
I think there is a strong chance he does go all 4, Seth. And I think for Jack too, just based on his development, it's not been, shall we say, an accelerated development, but also there's no really rush with him, right? It's not like the Wild need him right this second. Yeah. And the approach with Bill Guerin, right? And I think if there's one thing Bill Guerin should be complimented on, he hasn't rushed any of his prospects, right? Defense, again, we talk about, the timeline. Goaltenders take the longest, defensemen the second longest, right? So really for him, if he's going to get top 4 minutes in St. Cloud, which he should, and if he's going to be utilized in other areas, I really hope to see him more on a power play role too, especially on PP2, or if they're going to maybe sort of ease him back in the lineup to maybe see some time on the top unit. That to me would be the best thing for him, right? So I really think it's 4. Would not shock me if it's his last year, but it also depends on what we see from him this year. But I do really believe there's no really shame in going 4, and he's under a really good program with Brett Larson and the Huskies up there in that coaching staff. So I think for him, go all 4, see what happens.
Yeah, and I think that's the great part about it too, is that there really isn't any, like you alluded to, there's really no pressure. Is Bill Guerin just, this organization operates under a let's do this right, as opposed to trying to cut a corner and get a guy up here before he's ready, and then you just set his development back, you knock his confidence down, all these different things. And so he can certainly slot into that, one of those waves down the line of prospects that'll be hopefully making an impact on this team. But for sure that he's going to be ready for it when he does make the jump, because that just has never been a point of contention with this team. Is let's get these guys here, let's make sure we develop them, and then that'll figure itself out.
100%. And in today's NHL, right, Seth, we talk about players who have played on the highest levels, right? At this point, he is at the highest level he can play in an NCAA Division I. Again, he's had World Junior experience. Again, he was in USHL, again, at a really good development team up in Grand Rapids with the Thunderhawks. So he has excelled at every single step of his career development. So, when we look at Jack Peart, is he, going to be, sort of the flash in the pan, meaning, does he come off the page with you with some insane offensive numbers? No, but what was the quote from Jacques Lemaire? I think he talked about this with Koivu. He was a 50-goal guy. he scored only 5, but maybe prevented 45. And Jack Peart has more of that in his game, is that good, strong, smart defensive player. And he's going to do more on the opposing end than he is maybe on the offensive end.
And that's what counts as a defenseman. I mean, you can have your Erik Karlssons all day, and he scored somewhere around 30 goals, but his defensive numbers not great. And again, don't get me wrong, really, really good offensive defenseman. I'm not knocking him for that at all, but he's not known for his defense. So
no, and if the one thing, going back to 2000, right, the Wild have been built on a strong defensive core. Again, you talked about Peart, with us tonight, but as you mentioned, other names, Carson Lambos and others that, they've got a pipeline that's there. So the thing is, for Jack, and working with St. Cloud, and again, Brett Larson, the head coach, the defenseman himself, he's in one of the best college hockey conferences in the entire NCAA league. So at the end of it, it's a playoff game every single weekend, right? You're facing teams like UMD, North Dakota, Omaha. CC has had a resurgence, right? There's really no easy outs in their schedule, right? Their non-conferences, again, they're going to be playing Minnesota State. They're going to be playing, I believe, the Gophers again. So it's not easy. So it's only maybe 24 game schedule, but it's like a pro type opponents that you're going to be playing that also play pro style hockey. So for those who are questioning Jack and his ability to be ready in his development path, I would challenge you to watch him, especially for a full game. I think you would be impressed by what he does on the ice. And also that I do think that in a year or two, whether it's a jump right to the NHL or minors, he'll be ready for it.
Let's talk a little bit about the Huskies as we get closer and closer to the start of hockey season. It's still a little bit off in the rearview mirror, but it's on its way. So let's talk a little bit about the Huskies. We'll do so as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. If you are so inclined, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on Apple or on Spotify, whatever platform you're on, or join the comments on YouTube. We have a very healthy comment section, so you can join the likes of Travis, of Brian, of Denny, of any of those everydayers who comment on every single one of our videos. Join in on the fun, and we'll make sure that it is a good time for you. Nick Maxson joins us to discuss Jack Peart, and now we shift to the St. Cloud State Huskies. Nick, what is the outlook for the Huskies for this upcoming season?
It's kind of mixed, to be honest with you. Certainly the Huskies finished off strong last year. Now, mind you, they lost some key pieces of their leadership and their veteran core, with Jami Kranila going to Pittsburgh, also losing some other key players, both up front and in the back end. Spencer Meyer, 3-year captain, aging out, so the heart and soul of the team. But what they have coming in, right? Some of their new bodies coming in. Werner Miettinen, the brother of Vidi Miettinen, coming in from Fargo. They also have another draft pick coming in. Kyle, I'm trying to remember the defenseman's name. Sorry, it's been a long Monday, but at the end of it, I'm really excited about their freshman class, and I really think, with St. Cloud, it's going to be a split, and I say that in the sense of, again, there's no easy wins into the NCHC, and more often than not, it's going to be a battle. And when you got North Dakota, which should be a lot better, and mind you, their entire defensive core with North Dakota's turnover, but they also picked up the Miami goaltender Ludwig Pearson, who as a rookie lit up college hockey and made his namesake. So at the end of it, I think they will finish close to home ice position. We have them in our preview with MNCAA, as well as the Huskies Warming House podcast, finishing 4th or 5th in the conference. So at the end of it, it's going to be tough. It's hard to really pinpoint, but I think the offensive push is there. Goaltending, they do have senior Dominic Bassi coming back, so they've got some stability in that. Again, defensively, this team has always been solid. The big question is going to be with some of the offense they lost, who is going to step up. A lot of underclassmen on this roster. They'll be speedy. There's still some skill there with, I believe, 3rd round pick Adam Ingram, the Predators property. So I think it's there. Question is, can they gel quick as a unit? And if they do that, again, they're well coached and they keep to a structure and they should be all right.
Yeah, they got a heck of a coach, as you mentioned, who should be able to help speed up that process some, and that has got to give you a little solace knowing that Brett Larson is he's one of the best to do it, and he is going to have this team, whether they win or lose, he's going to have this team ready to rock every game.
100%. If there's one thing, and it was Warren Clark, sorry, it was the defenseman that I was referring to as a Tampa Bay pick. Brett Larson and his staff with RJ Enga, now former SCSU defenseman as a video coach, Clark Custer, as well as another assistant head coach, former Western Michigan and then Alaska coach, Dave Shayak. This group prepares as well as anybody in the NCHC. And they really do, when you watch them in practice, they really do focus on the small details of the game on the ice, because that's what separates it, right? And again, we talk about how hard the league is. I know the Big Ten, overshadowed the NCHC a bit last year, and rightfully so. That's a very exciting conference to watch. Might be very much the same again this year. But that is what you have to do in these two leagues. It's one thing here or one thing there. And, if you miss a small detail here, that puck's either in the back of your net or you're missing an opportunity. That could be the difference between a win and a loss and home ice advantage coming towards the playoffs. So, again, you can't say enough things about those guys at the helm. Again, Brett Larson, a better person off the ice. He's just wonderful. The door is always open. He's always been very kind to us here in the media side. Wonderful human being to talk to. So, for college kids that are listening and watching, for St. Cloud, I mean, if you ever get a chance to talk to that group, do it, because they're a wonderful, wonderful bunch.
Nick, we appreciate the time tremendously today. Before we let you go, though, I would not feel good if I didn't give you an opportunity to just plug both shows, as mentioned, MNCAA and the Huskies Warming House podcast. For those that want to listen, where can they?
Yes, they can. They can catch us on YouTube as well as part of the Soda Pod Network, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're basically everywhere. For those who like the NCHC on the Huskies Warming House podcast, we've been doing team previews both on the men's and the WCHA women's side. So you can catch up with all of those. And of course, MNCAA little snippets here in the summer with some video content coming this year too. So going to be expanding that. And again, all part of the Soda Pod Network. And we're always happy to have everybody watch and listen.
Outstanding, Nick. A blast. And for listeners, we'll keep an eye on Jack Peart throughout the course of the season. This won't be the last time that Nick graces our airwaves. So we hope that he has a great season, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Make sure that you take the time, if you haven't already, to subscribe to Locked On Wild on YouTube, on your favorite podcast platforms, so you don't miss out on any of our content throughout the week, including Locked On Wild Boot Camp, which rolls on through the off season. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.